Hello, everyone. I pray you're doing well, and I pray you have a very good week. So the question on the minds of many Blacks is, what is our plan? Or what is our strategy, long-term and short-term? It's a very legitimate question because of the anti-Blackness we see coming from the Trump administration. And because we typically don't have a long or short-term plan like our white opposition. Most of the time, we're reacting to their strategy. I am sick and tired of reacting to their strategy and not having one of our own. Hence, we often don't know what hit us when they implement some white supremacy agenda item. For example, we're currently reacting to MAGA's short-term plan, which is Project 2025, and it is part of their white supremacy long-term strategy. Well, in this video, I give you step 2 in what I believe our long-term strategy should be. Our step 2 is simply understanding the short and long-term strategy of our opposition. We can't develop our strategy without first understanding their strategy. So in this video, I lay out the short and long-term strategy of white conservatives. Now in part 1, which I released last Sunday, I discussed the critical need for strong Black Christian leadership. The link to that video is in the description. So for now, take good notes, and I will be releasing part 3 very soon. Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. Hello, everybody. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Welcome to the show. Without any evidence, Trump recently blamed DEI for a deadly aviation crash. Many people, including myself, reacted immediately. I was saddened and appalled by his outrageous and insensitive claim. In fact, please, let's take a moment of silence for the victims and their families. And please pray for the family of the woman pilot on the Black Hawk helicopter. The family believes that it's in their daughter's best interest to protect her identity as of right now. My heart just goes out to that family and to all the families. But Trump's attack, and we're going to get into some things in this video. Trump's attack on DEI isn't random. It's not just Trump being Trump. It's never Trump just being Trump. It's part of a short and long-term strategy. And I'll break that long and short-term strategy down as I go into this video. Now, some Black people, unsurprisingly, argue that Trump's war on DEI doesn't affect Blacks because DEI primarily benefits white women and LGBTQ plus people. This belief is dangerously misguided, and it ignores the broader white supremacy, white conservative agenda. Trump and MAGA, their attack on DEI serve a short-term strategy, watch this, of distracting, demeaning, deceiving, dividing, disrupting, and driving whites to the poll. That is the short-term strategy. Let me say those words again. Their anti-DEI strategy, short-term strategy, is to distract. While we were focused on what he said about DEI, he and MAGA were behind the scenes working their long-term strategy. It is demeaning to us African American people. It is extremely demeaning to us because it says that we are not qualified. If you see us in a space, we got there not because of our qualifications, but because of the color of our skin. It's deceiving because it makes you think that the white dudes who are in those spaces got there because of their smarts. And American history shows us that whites have obtained wealth and so much more because they are the majority with the power, not because they're any smarter. It's disrupting. It disrupts the nation, which is exactly what they want. And then it drives whites to the polls. It drives them to the polls. It drives them to go vote because they buy into this false notion of reverse discrimination. Meanwhile, Trump and MAGA's war on DEI, again, is part of a larger, broader political, legal, economic, and spiritual strategy. That's what you got to understand. And that strategy, that white conservative long-term strategy, has been in place and working since at least 1865, immediately after the Civil War. And obviously it was at work as well during the 240 or so years of slavery. But I want to pick up from 1865, immediately after the Civil War. Remember, white conservatives play a very long game. They patiently set strategies in place that they know may take them 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, but they patiently implement that long-term strategy. For example, they started working to pack the federal court system ever since the Brown case. That was 54, 55, that's about 70, 71 years ago. And they started working on dismantling that Brown case as far back as then, and have just patiently worked their long-term strategy to do just that. Similarly, they started working to gut the Voting Rights Act about 10 years later because it came into fruition in 65. And the Brown case goes back to 1955, 54, 55. Nevertheless, they kept that fight going until the political winds were favorable. And that was 2013, which just so happened to be when Obama was reelected. They knew then their time had come. Chief Justice John Roberts, he started out in the Reagan administration working to undo the Voting Rights Act. And so he just patiently rose through the ranks until they placed him in the Chief Justice position. And he wrote the opinion that gutted the Voting Rights Act. Conversely, Black people have not always maintained even a short-term strategy, not to mention a long-term strategy. Instead, we find ourselves oftentimes reacting to white conservatives' short and long-term strategy. So let me explain what I'm saying. Now, my explanation will be longer than normal when I do the shorter videos. And it's also going to be technical at times. So stay focused and engaged. Please watch this video from start to finish and revisit it as needed, because you're not going to absorb everything that I say in this video in one sitting. This isn't about my opinions. I'm not sharing, and I seldom do, my opinions. I'm going to present in this video facts and the law. Facts and the law, along with my legal analysis, which is backed by years, decades of legal study and practice. So I don't play a lawyer on TV. I actually practice law. All right. So my goal in going through this in some details is simply to protect you from disinformation from Black MAGA, which includes the pro-Black imposters. Some of these pro-Black imposters are offering erroneous legal opinions without the requisite background, knowledge, skills, or learning. So I'm warning you, don't be deceived. You know, like this erroneous claim that there is a separate hate crime bill specifically for Asians. Man, I have spent months debunking that false information. Months. It's not true. Anyway, let's pick up with the end of slavery and the birth of white conservative resistance. Now, why am I going back that far? Because this is their long-term strategy. You see, you got to realize these folks have been fighting us for centuries. And that fight never stopped. And the mistake that some of these pro-Black imposters make today is they are trusting of these white conservatives, these white supremacists. And unfortunately, they're causing others to be trusting of white supremacy. I'm an old country boy, and where I'm from, we have a saying: never, ever, ever trust a rattlesnake. I don't care how good it looks. I don't care how infatuated you are with its tail wagging and you hearing the oh, that's so fascinating. Oh, that looks so beautiful. If you take that snake, put that snake in your hand and put it close to you, it's going to bite you. It's going to bite you. Why? Because it's a rattlesnake. And that is the way white supremacy is. White supremacy will bite you eventually. All right? Slavery officially ended on December 6, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified. African Americans were freed from bondage, but not from racial oppression. That was a powerful amendment to the Constitution, but at the end of the day, it was just a piece of paper. The hearts of people did not change toward us. So the system, the legal system of slavery was done with, but racial oppression continued, very much so. Southern whites who built massive wealth through slavery refused to see blacks as equal. And I want to highlight something. The system of slavery was not primarily about race as it was about greed, money. Race was just a justifier. Whites created the social construct of race, back in the 13th century, 14th century, so that they could justify going into Africa and enslaving Africans. And race just gave them the reason to say, we're not doing a bad thing. These people, they are not like us. They are not equal to us. And most of all, they are savages, and we are doing them a favor, exposing them to our culture and to our religion, Christianity. Now, you know that is not a slam on Christianity. I am a minister. I am a preacher. And I am not slamming Christianity. I am saying they have perverted Christianity for their white supremacist purposes. So again, Southern whites just were not prepared after several and a half centuries to see blacks as equal. So radical Republicans passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to grant basic freedoms to our ancestors. But that Civil Rights Act of 1866 was vulnerable to repeal. The South was down because this was just after the Civil War, but they were determined to rise again, and they actually did. But before they did, Congress passed the 14th Amendment in 1868 and the 15th Amendment in 1870, and that made it much, much more difficult for Southern whites to re-enslave blacks or to deny us the right to vote or to try and take away our citizenship. White Southerners never stopped, however, resisting, and they struck a political deal with the North to regain power and control over the South if they allowed the North to keep or maintain the presidency. So basically, the North, after winning the Civil War and winning our freedom, they then turned around and sold us out. Now, after Reconstruction was that 10 to about 12-year period immediately after slavery where blacks began to rise, but not for long, because again, they struck that deal, all right? And so white Southerners went about enacting black code laws, which created the Jim Crow era. I'm showing you this long-term strategy that we have been dealing with, that we have been struggling against. And after they got that Jim Crow system in place, they created things like sharecropping. Because what was this all about the whole time? Money. Money. That's why they were so distraught, angry, upset about slavery ending. Their cash cow was gone. They no longer had free labor. Imagine what any people could do if they had 2.5 centuries of free labor. And oh, by the way, when slavery ended, we didn't get very much of anything to try to build our lives. All right? So sharecropping, vagrancy laws. In other words, if you didn't keep a job, they could lock you up. And once they locked you up, they then could rent you out to white corporations that would pay you pennies on the dollar. So that's why I keep saying this is about money. It was always about money, and it is still about money. money. And they also enforced redlining and restrictive covenants, which relegated blacks to ghettos, to impoverished areas. You see, this is a long-term strategy that we have been dealing with, and we don't have our own long-term strategy to counter, to fight, to defeat this. Yet we keep fighting. So every institution in America, the law, politics, economics, education, the government, were all weaponized against us to keep us in a near slave-like status. I'm showing you this long-term strategy that they have always had in place. Now, white Southerners, during this Jim Crow era, they fought hard to protect their cash cow, sharecropping, convict leasing, vagrancy laws. They fought hard to keep that in place, and they used violent and nonviolent means. Nathan Bedford Forrest founded the KKK to terrorize black people. He was one of the most violent, meanest, hateful men you could ever run into or read about. That's how evil that man was. They also formed the White Citizens Council, which was equally hateful, but tried to use nonviolent means to suppress and oppress black people. The federal government also played a role in suppressing black progress. I'm showing you the long-term strategy. Why are you going through all of that, Mr. Corbett? To show you the long-term strategy that has been in place for a very long time. The federal government was all up in this. The United States Department of Agriculture discriminated against blacks, causing blacks to lose nearly 1 million acres of farmland on the East Coast, the southeast part of the United States. I saw that happen as a teenager. I saw black farmers lose their farms. And that's where those black farming lawsuits came to be. And by the way, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, before they left office, a few months before they left office, were able to maneuver the law to get some of those black farmers $4 billion in a settlement. Some other minorities also received from that money, but I'm going to explain why in this video. Civil rights leaders, including Dr. King and members of the Black Panther Party, were targeted and assassinated. The FBI created a program called COINTELPRO, where they surveilled, infiltrated, and dismantled black liberation movements. And then there was the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy is really important because the people who were fighting to keep us enslaved, that was the Democratic Party. That was the Dixiecrats in the Democratic Party. And it was the radical Republicans who fought to free us from slavery. So back during slavery, Republicans were fighting to free us from slavery, and the Dixiecrats of the Democrat Party were fighting to keep us in slavery. But then that all changed pursuant to the Southern Strategy. In the 1930s, in fact, black voters began leaving the Republican Party due to Democratic President FDR's New Deal. Simultaneously, when blacks started pouring into the Democratic Party, whites, the Dixiecrats, started leaving. That all started back in the 30s. And the shift accelerated in the 60s, leading to the high point of the Southern Strategy, where Republicans courted white Southerners by opposing the civil rights movement. So people like Barry Goldwater, who ran for president during that time, racist segregationist senators like Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and others, they all opposed the civil rights movement, right? The passage of the civil rights laws, which caused white Dixiecrats to leave the Democratic Party to join the Republican Party, which is where Barry Goldwater, Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms had all joined. So the Republican Party of today is not the Republican Party of yesterday. And the Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party that tried to enslave us about 200 years ago. Despite the virulent white resistance, black people still defeated Jim Crow. And they did so through the civil rights movement. Dr. King led the push for major civil rights legislation, including 3 laws, major civil rights laws that we are still using every single day of our lives. The Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, and the Fair Housing Act of 68. We still use them to this day. These laws gave the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments teeth, because the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, they, without enforcement mechanisms like the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, they again, as I said earlier, they were just pieces of paper. But once these laws were passed, and it took almost 100 years later, then those Reconstruction Amendments had teeth. The Brown versus Board of Education decision, argued by the late Justice Thurgood Marshall, it overturned Plessy v. Ferguson and ended segregation in schools. So it played a big part as well. So the civil rights movement brought down Jim Crow, and it caused and forced white conservatives to once again have to regroup, because they never die. They don't quit. They don't give up. They just regroup. And that's what we're contending with today. The regrouping of the white conservative, white supremacist movement. So the GOP repositioned itself after Jim Crow fell to protect white power, to protect white wealth, for what they saw as a black-led progressive movement. And many of them say that is financed by Jewish people. So all this money that they had made off of our sweat and our blood, 240 so years of slavery, another 100 years of Jim Crow, they positioned themselves to protect that wealth. See, this is really simple. This is not a complicated history. They're trying to hide it. They don't want it known, but it's not a complicated history at all. So I want to now give you the specifics of this white supremacist, white conservative, long-term strategy that they have used against us, and very effectively. So here are some of the things that they did as a part of their long-term strategy and continue to do to this day. One, discrediting the civil rights movement and its leaders. Discrediting the civil rights movement and its leaders. White conservatives put out talking points and had their scholars, their ministers, their sociologists, and politicians to go out there and put out these talking points. And as always, their black sycophants, they repeat these talking points as well. They attack progressive politics, including affirmative action. And there is another set of programs that their long-term strategy enabled them to gut eventually. It took them time, but they were able to gut it eventually. They spread false claims that the Democratic Party destroyed the black family. How many times have you heard that it was the progressive policies of LBJ that ran the black man out of the home, out of the family, and started creating single-parent families? How many times have you heard that? Well, I've done several videos debunking that. I show you evidence in those videos that it was really Southern whites who conditioned welfare, SNAP, and all the rest on men not being in the home. That was not the Democratic Party. That was the new Republican Party. I put the links to those videos in the description. Go watch them, please. They labeled LBJ and the Democratic presidents as racist. So, yes, LBJ used the N-word. LBJ was probably a racist, but he was able to overcome it enough to sign into law the legislation that put Jim Crow to an end. That was huge. And then they say the same thing, especially certain segments of our community. Like they attacked Joe Biden incessantly, right? Jim Crow Joe. I can't tell you how many times I heard that over the last year. And here this guy was doing everything he could to help the African American community, going to the point, his last few days in office, of pardoning a bunch of people, and most especially even pardoning Marcus Garvey. All right. What else is a part of this white conservative long-term strategy? Using abortion and transgender issues to distract from their racist agenda. You see, right after the Brown case, the country was kind of sick of seeing all the racism. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that whites became angels. But there was so much of that for the years that King and the civil rights movement were fighting civil rights that it just really, folks got just tired of it. All right? At least get it out from in front of us, in front of the TV, because King, that revolution was televised. All right? And he used that very effectively. So they knew they could not use the racial issue the way they had in the past. So they cleverly began to use the abortion issue. And today they use the transgender issue. And obviously they use the illegal immigrant issue. They started to target the Department of Education to push school privatization. They already began pulling their children out of public schools after the Brown case, but they wanted to get money from the U.S. Department of Education to pay for their private schools for their children. So that's when they set their eye on the public schools, on the education department, and are now in place to do something about it. See, that's long-term strategy. Forged new alliances with white evangelical churches. And I say new because the white evangelical church has always been connected with white supremacy, right? Southern Baptist Convention approved slavery. Methodists pulled Richard Allen out of their prayer meeting. So did the Presbyterian Church. It too was knee-deep in complicity with slavery. But they forged new alliances with white evangelical ministers and preachers and theologians, etc. They started packing the federal courts with far-right judges. They said, the judges who are overturning white supremacy laws are in the federal court system. So they said, we better start paying attention and trying to get our people on those benches, which is why I was so distraught when Trump put 3 far-right judges on the United States Supreme Court, in large part because only 59.6% of black folks voted in 2016. And Trump even thanked them. Thank you for not voting for Hillary. Thank you for staying home or not voting for Hillary. Now I'm getting ready to put some judges in place that are going to make sure you all never get full justice. He played us, and he's still playing some members of the African American community. They recruited some African American men to spread disinformation. They've been doing it, but they have ramped it up big time. I mean, flooding the zone with disinformation targeting black people. Really. They love to co-opt civil rights words to oppose racial progress. They will co-opt those words. They will redefine those words. They will blow those words up and make them toxic. A lot of whites don't even know what some of these words mean originally. They just know they've been told by Fox News and other media outlets, social media outlets especially, that they're bad. Critical race theory is bad. Black history is bad. Speaking of black history, I don't know. I'm getting contradictory information. But from what I'm reading, the Department of Defense will not be spending any money to celebrate Black History Month. But then Trump put out a proclamation thanking black people. Now, can you see the double-handedness of that? That gives those who are complicit with him in our communities, black conservatives, pro-black imposters, that gives them the opportunity to say, he didn't get rid of Black History Month. He didn't do that. He put out a proclamation. And all we got to say is, do you think we're fools? He put out the executive orders that got rid of Black History Month. And he just put that proclamation out there so you can say what you just said. They are now lining themselves with the billionaire technocrats creating an oligarchy. Okay? That's where we are. Elon Musk seems to be exercising a lot of power over the federal government right now. And another thing they're doing is they're using their anti-DEI war and Elon Musk, Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, to clean out what they call the deep state. In other words, they are terminating or forcing federal employees to retire, to resign, so that they can replace them with Trump's political appointees or members of MAGA. And the problem there is about 20% of those federal employees are African Americans. About 20%. It is the only industry where we are overrepresented. Most of the places where we work, we're underrepresented, but 20%, that's more than the 14 or 15% of the population that we make up. And the problem down the road is when it is necessary to resist white supremacy at the federal level, it's going to be hampered because the people inside the federal government who would have brought about that resistance to white supremacy would have been replaced with MAGA. You see what I'm saying? So that's another part of their short and long-term agenda and strategy. These people have been working this thing for, I'm telling you, a long time. And the last thing that I want to talk about, and I want to dig my teeth in here just a little bit, because this is really important. They hijacked the 14th Amendment. See, this is a part of their long-term strategy. They co-opted the 14th Amendment. White conservatives weaponized the 14th Amendment, which was originally meant to help blacks. Now they're using it to harm blacks. Okay, thank you to everyone for watching this video. Now, what I did in this video was I laid out the short and long-term legal strategy of white conservatives / white supremacists. I primarily focused on the law because first, I'm a civil rights attorney, and second, they have weaponized the law against us. Remember, slavery and Jim Crow were both legalized. Now, we cannot develop our counter strategy until we know their strategy better than they know it. Then and only then can we create an effective counter strategy. However, I stopped the video here because I'm going to create a part 2 that focuses on this critical step of them hijacking the 14th Amendment. All right, we got to stay there and focus on that because that heinous step has prevented us from correcting some of the wrong, some of the evil, some of the harm they have done to our community. It interferes with our ability to get so-called tangibles, specifically for us African Americans, including reparations. Now, I know professionally how awful it was for them to hijack the 14th Amendment because my firm is in courthouses, courtrooms daily litigating these cases. I am not a TV lawyer or YouTube lawyer. I am a real civil rights litigator. But the problem is most African Americans don't know nor understand how detrimental it was for white supremacists to pull this hideous act off. So again, for that reason, I'm making this second part about them hijacking the 14th Amendment. I'm making it into a separate video. And in it, I will explain how they did it, how they hijacked the 14th Amendment, and the broader consequences for our community. So you must watch part 2 and learn the information in part 2 so that you can understand how we can fight back. Also, make sure to share this video, part 2. Again, thank you for watching this video and for watching part 2. All right, so I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. And remember, no matter what, no matter who says otherwise, stay woke.